Investment savvy mortgage brokers. What the hell are they? You hear about it all the time. Everyone's saying, get an investment savvy mortgage broker. But what is that? So over the past couple of years, we've been running this show. We get top property experts, and about 2.5 years ago or so, Jeff tells us the exact specific time, we got on Morgan Bushell. He is an investment savvy mortgage broker, and this guy has bought 5 properties and absolutely crushed it. He's been doing renovations and value adds. He bought a burnout house and he renovated it, spent like $60,000 and made hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equity, and then went again. And he was buying in Wagga when they were calling it Wagga Wagga, if you know what I mean. So he is very much investment focused, and he has been running his business and absolutely crushing it. But what he's now doing is setting himself up to go on a buying spree. So he's going to be buying properties over the next 12 months, and we thought this was an opportune time to get him on and find out, what are you doing? What are the exact steps that you're taking to make sure that you can go on this property buying spree? Because not everyone does that. Like, I like to think about it like a slingshot. He is taking those steps back so that he can launch himself forward. And his strategy's actually changed over the last couple of years. So that is what this session is all about. It's part talking about broking, but it's also part his story and understanding how he's going to take his property investing to the next level. Hey everyone, my name is Joe Tucker, and together with Jeff Miles, we created Oz Property Investors, Australia's largest property investment forum with over 75,000 property investors there. Each week, we interview top property experts, and you guys get to sit along. You get to be a part of that. So let's jump into this session with Morgan Bushell from Full Circle Finance. He's an investment-savvy mortgage broker, somebody that I use within my business because he knows his stuff. You really have to surround yourself and build a team of quality people so that you can create your own slingshot to let go. So let's jump in.
What were the reasons, or which properties did you select to sell, and what were the reasons for those?
Yeah.
So there's 2 really good, so it was 2. I bought 3 properties in Logan, and I'd actually sold 2 of those. So it was kind of 2 reasons why I sold. The first one was basically at the time when I'd done those properties, I'd kind of buddied up with a builder who was great from a cost analysis perspective. Like, everything that he did was quite cheap, but unfortunately the workmanship was also quite cheap as well. So even though the properties kind of washed their own face, I kept getting hit up with like repair bill after repair bill, and it just got to a point where it just was not fun. And obviously the property had gone up in value, so looking at it, I was like, well, this is really costing quite a bit to hold. But also, it's gone up in value. So I decided to actually bite the bullet and sell 2. So I sold 1, bought in Kippering, and then I was like, oh, maybe I can. Right? Yeah. And then I kind of realized that I also needed to let another one go, which was in Kingston, Logan. So that's kind of why. It was really holding costs just through the bad workmanship. But then also, looking at the prices, I thought, I really want to get on a hand of that cash and just hold on to it. And obviously hindsight, seeing how prices are today, I kind of regret it a little bit, but it was something that I really needed to do because honestly, it was like burning a hole in my pocket. So I just couldn't maintain that.
Is that a successful thing? Not successful, but is that strategy still possible? Like when you were looking at Steve McKnight buying 0 to 130 properties in 2 minutes or however long it took him, that strategy is not possible anymore. But can we still do this by renovate, extract equity, and then go again? Is that what people should be thinking about?
I think it's definitely a feasible strategy. Help lots of people with that. And I mean, my situation was a bit different because I guess I was trying to do a good enough reno to then release the equity to go again. And I was trying to do as little deposits for each property as I could to maintain, I guess, how much I need to put down for each one. So that was my circumstances, but not everyone's obviously the same. Like,
Yeah.
I was trying to, do that thing. So,
Yeah.
the whole like, buy, sell, flip, and then do it to make a profit, like as a proper job, like that's a hard gig. So, it probably wouldn't be something I'd ever do. But to answer your question, like it's definitely possible to do the buy, renovate, and then revalue to go again.
Yeah.
But you just have to do a lot more due diligence with that.
Can you talk to equity and usable equity? Like, what's the difference between equity and usable equity? Because I think that I've got a $700,000 purchase property, and then I bought it for $500,000. So I now have $200,000 worth of equity, but that doesn't mean you have $200,000 of usable equity that you can go out and do. Can you kind of talk to the difference, and then we can unpack your story, because I think this is an interesting point.
Yeah, definitely. So that's right. Like using your example, let's just say you've had an uplift of 200K. So that is the amount of equity that it's gone up by. But what I say by usable equity is when you go back to the bank, get it revalued, and it's 200K more. If you want to extract the equity, banks don't let you actually borrow that full 100% of the 200. Typically, they'll let you only do 80% of that. So that's 160, for example, and that 160 is the usable equity that you can really use as your deposit for that next property.
Yeah. Okay. So that's actually a pretty easy calculation to do. So it's not also about the equity growth that you've had. It's how much debt you have on the property. So, for instance, if you have a home value worth $700,000 and you have an outstanding loan of $300,000. I've got the calculator here. The problem is it's on my website, so Jeff isn't going to be happy for me to share this, but I think it's worthwhile showing the audience the calculation real quick. So, because this really opened my eyes to like, okay, cool, I've made X amount of dollars. Now what? So essentially it's the purchase price times 80%, which gives you $560,000 minus $300,000 of the outstanding loan. And then that gives you $260,000 worth of usable equity. So it's not 700, 1, 2, 3 minus how much? 300, which looks like 400,000. God, too many zeros. Which looks like 270. No, it looks like $400,000. It's actually only $260,000.
But you can go above not 80% though, Joe. It's just that then you incur LMI. Well, you can. Yeah.
You just enter it in the calculator. It works out pretty nicely. But it's a basic calculation, which I think is super useful for people. Well, what are you buying? Before you get into the good stuff, like what does setting it up mean? So you've got your financials, because you've run a rather successful mortgage broking business, which now allows you the capital to be able to, and the borrowing ability. But what does setting it up mean? So how did you think about structuring, and how did you think about that side of things?
Well, what questions did you ask to understand?
Oh,
yeah. So
come on.
No, like kind of what we went through earlier with usable equity. It was like refinancing my loans to release usable equity to basically structure it in a way where right now I've got kind of everything set up with all the released equity, but I'm also not, I guess, paying any interest whilst it just sits there waiting. So now that's kind of all done, and it's just really waiting for, I guess, higher income with my accountant to then use that equity to then go buy more property afterwards.
So what did that equity release look like? Is so you had, I don't know, $300,000 of usable equity, and you went back and refinanced, and now you just put that equity out and then put it in your offset account.
Yeah, that's literally it. So just structure it in a way where the existing loans, I've kind of like rewritten them dollar for dollar, but then created what would be a second loan, which would just be like an equity release loan on interest only. And then, I'd park the released equity in a linked offset account to that equity release loan. So it's just sitting waiting to get used now.
What are some of the creative things that you've seen people do from a rental perspective? Like, how have they increased rents? What are some of the ways that you've seen people increase rents? An example.
Yeah,
an example.
Sure.
An example of one that I've seen recently is very recently is someone got solar panels on their roof. They put solar panels on. They paid like $4,000 on it, and that gave them an additional $60 a week rent, because it's going to help reduce the electricity bill for people out there. So people out there are like, oh, wow, actually, I can't afford my electricity. I'm going to get solar. I'm willing to pay a little bit more for that property. That then reduces their electricity bill. It then makes a tax deduction for you. So that's a super creative one I didn't even think about. So hats off to that.
Can I have some of those tenants? Can I have some of those tenants, Joe? Because that's like
well, no,
you
don't have them because you don't have solar, mate.
Yeah, but what, $3,000 a year though? So they're willing to pay. How much is it anyway? So as Joe said, what are some of the creative ways or things that people are doing, Morgan, that you're seeing?
Yeah. So I didn't know about solar panels either. So that's pretty awesome. But look,
maybe that's what I can put on my roof instead of replacing it.
Yeah, what else can I put there? No, some of the basic things is just literally doing a cosmetic reno, so nothing structural, but enough to bring it up to market value where you can achieve market rent. Some of the other things we're seeing is people, adding like a granny flat, for example, to another point, reconfiguring like a home to maybe add an extra bedroom, or the layout, for example, to make it more optimal in that sense. Whilst banks don't necessarily give you the lending for it, you can also just rent out rooms in a property that you maybe live in, or an investment property where you rent out room by room. But for that particular example, banks are a little bit more strict with how they assess that income. So
what is that?
Yeah.
And what about Airbnbs?
Yeah, same thing. It's a little bit more strict. Like they'll normally want to see like tax returns or the listing of like the annual kind of figures on it. And typically they'll kind of shade it by a figure where it's maybe not as kind to your borrowing capacity as it would be if it was through a regular property manager.
Yeah. Okay. They'll shade so much of it off that it's like you'll get $600 a week for this property, but if you do Airbnb, you'll get $1,200. But by the time they've shaved it, it's probably only going to be $550. So it doesn't actually help you in any way. Obviously, it helps you from a cash flow perspective. You get more cash from it, which is great. That leads to your deposit, but does that lead to increasing your serviceability? So because this is it, like at the outset of the show, we've got cash and equity on one hand, and we've got borrowing ability and serviceability. So any other kind of tricky ways that people have increased this borrowing capacity and serviceability one? Because this is the one that everyone's equity and cash rich and borrowing ability and serviceability poor.
Yeah, there's probably two things that I guess in recent times are a little bit more outside the box. So because rates have gone up so much, some major banks, for example, have removed the servicing buffer that they load on top of existing loans. So there's a few conditions that you have to meet, but you can actually refinance existing loans. So a good example of that could be if you've got, say, loans with like a third tier lender and the rates are mid 7s or 8s. You could potentially refinance those to one of these first tier lenders, so like Big Four kind of bank sort of stuff, and that can actually help with cash flow and to a lesser degree also give you more borrowing capacity because of the interest rate change.
Interesting.
And then the second thing, which is kind of a bit more relevant to these times, and I think it depends if it's the right thing for you, is some people are starting to utilize trust structures to preserve their borrowing capacity. And I use the word preserve quite strongly because it doesn't, in my opinion, give you unlimited borrowing capacity. And to another degree as well, if it makes sense to you, then that's probably where you could utilize it. It's just a lot of people don't really realize that there's a lot that comes with, using that type of vehicle that maybe they don't quite understand. So
like negative gearing tax
Yeah.
offset credits is massive,
Yeah.
right?
Land tax as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, that's right.
You pay that.
Annual costs, land tax.
Accountants
We have to
fees.
remember as well, like this is all based on this at this point in time. Like banks are pretty happy to accommodate it if you get the accountant letter, but they could very well change their policies tomorrow, and then this strategy's kind of out the window. So
Yeah, and then it's stuck in a trust. You took a step back. You got your financials done. We've now decided that you are buying. You extracted all the equity out of your portfolio. You sold down 2 properties. So you're just sitting on a lump of cash. And obviously, I'm not going to ask you what that lump of cash is, but you got a good set of cash here. And then what are you gonna do? Like, how are you going to split this money up? Let's say you've got $2 million of borrowing capacity. Does that mean you go out there and buy a $2 million property? Or you say, oh, I'm going to buy 4, I'm going to buy 3, I'm going to buy 2. Like, how are you kind of framing this and strategizing this from a broking perspective?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I don't really necessarily want to put everything to the limit again, and just go like completely nuts. I mean, yeah, like I've got a whole year to kind of do it, and for me, yeah, like it's going to be, I guess, as much as my borrowing capacity allows me to with what I've already done. And to a degree, I won't really know that hardcore number until my accountants have done the returns. But yeah, like the goal is to just really buy as many as I can, and then yeah, that's really what I'm sticking to.
So when it's buy as many as you can, is it buy as many multiple as you can? Buy as many $250,000 shit boxes in the middle of nowhere, or are you going to buy like 500,000? Are you going to buy 800,000? Are you going to buy 2 million? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of looking between that's like 400 to like 700 kind of range.
Big range.
Seeing a lot of people buying in that range, and yeah, I guess the next part for me is probably figuring out where to buy. So that's really the next kind of focus, because yeah, that's probably the next thing I have to next figure out.
Which entity are you looking to buy? And I think we spoke about this before the show, but which entity are you looking to buy in?
Yeah, so I would probably like to buy one more within my trust, and I say this now, that might change when I actually get around to doing it.
Your existing trust that you already have set up?
Yeah, so if I can do that, that'd be great. Otherwise, I may do another one perhaps to get that done, or just keep buying in my name. It kind of, to a degree, comes down to borrowing capacity and what my accountant says, but yeah, I'd like to definitely do that just so it kind of, I guess, preserves it in a way. But again, like, yeah, it comes down to borrowing capacity, what the accountant says. So yeah.
So what's the thinking behind no renovations? Like, what are you getting? Because we all know, like we've just covered off, your entire portfolio was built on renovations. That gave you the equity that allowed you to go again. Why are you not doing that?
Yeah, good question. So it kind of boils down to, I'd say, 2 things. So one is the time aspect. Like even if you're not lifting a paintbrush or doing anything, I just don't have enough time to do that. And yeah, like I'd probably be in a position where I'd pay people to do it. I still have to manage them, or at least manage the property manager who manages the professionals. And yeah, I mean, you can probably do a fair bit of due diligence on like how much work's done, but there's still, I guess, the aspect of things that are unknown, like things that you don't know until you start poking and prodding on like walls or things that you actually have to replace. So if it is possible to buy a place where I don't have to lift a finger or do anything that's like structural or cosmetic for that matter, then that's great. It just means I can move on to the next one way quicker than having to wait, I guess, to realize that renovation or uplift in value since I bought it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I mean, my first renovation, oh shit, I'm gonna mess the numbers up here. I bought it for $280,000. I spent $30,000 on a renovation, and then got it revalued at $360,000. Right. So I spent 30,
Nice.
and I got $360,000. So that gave me that amount of equity. But the real value of it, it's now worth $550,000-$600,000 because I bought it well. So my thinking is, if I bought that thing at $360,000 and held it, I would have made all of the money from buying in the right area and choosing the best location and the best property at that. However, for me in my early stages of my property investing portfolio, that was really important for me to pull my equity out of it to be able to go again. But now, as someone that has a more established portfolio, that equity is not as valuable as it is at my early stages. So the types of properties that you're buying now are not necessarily the same as what they were at the beginning, which is super, super interesting, because you're valuing your time, but also you're like, cool, I can buy like, you have a successful business, right? You can buy a boatload of property. You have a big nest egg here, and you have a big nest egg of serviceability and borrowing ability, and a big equity and cash. You can pump. So increasing equity by $50,000 isn't going to move the needle for you. So it's like, cool, I don't need to spend that time. I just need to go out there, acquire until you've run out, and then you regroup. By that time, that first one would have grown substantially, the second one and the third one, and then you're like, great, let's go again. Super interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And I think the main thing as well is, like, fundamentally, the improvements actually go down in value, whereas the land goes up as well. So I guess thinking about it just purely from that perspective, like, yeah, at some point you're probably going to have to renovate it to bring it up to a standard where tenants are going to be happy and they're not going to trash the place or whatever. But yeah, really, we're all just kind of investing in the thing that goes up in value, which is land.